Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, wherever you are joining us from around this lovely planet of ours. Welcome to Creation Conversations. And joining us for this wonderful program on diet is we have Craig Hawkins, we have our International Director, John Buckay, we have Diane Eager, we also have Glenn Wilson, and me, Sam, your friendly
We're
neighborhood
missing
techie.
somebody, Sam. We're missing
I
somebody.
know we're missing someone. Joe's out on the road. He's tried to connect multiple times via hotel Wi-Fi, which is, if you know hotel Wi-Fi, is not particularly the greatest of things at the best of times. So do keep him in prayer. But we have a jam-packed show for you tonight, and it's good to see people start to filter through in the comments and viewers and things like that. So without further ado, John, you're up
Well,
first. You want to kick us
firstly,
off?
Sam, I haven't seen you in weeks because I've been away too. So really good to see you back online. And yes, it would be good to have Joe here, but we've talked before the program, so I know some of the things he was going to say, so I can say them as well. I happen to bring a lot of things with me, like grapes and carrots. And well, the interesting thing is we're going to be talking about diet. We might even bring a dead alligator or two on the program. We've got access to things like that and discuss what we should be eating, what the Bible says we should be eating. But before that, I'm going to give you a review of what Diane and I and some of our helpers have been doing in our Creation Discovery Center this week. So, Sam, if you want to put my slides up there, that would be good. Right. So we have the Creation Discovery Center. We originally made that logo there for Craig's one down in Tasmania. Now I've expanded it up to Brisbane. And in fact, when you actually, why aren't I moving, Sam? Can you tell me why I'm not moving?
Have you clicked into your full screen presentation?
Oh, right. Very good. Thank you. So you can see I've been away for a while. Okay. So let's go to there. No, it's not going there, Sam. What am I doing wrong?
So go down to your taskbar at the
There
bottom.
we are. It's fine. I think I've got it. Okay. So we were going to be having this weekend our open day, brand new Aboriginal displays, because that's a big hot topic here at football games when they do the welcome to country. And one church pastor has been taken to basically a law court because he refused to do it. He said the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. So we have a whole display on that. And the other one we've been working on, particularly Diane and I, deals with fossil Lucy. And we are sometimes not all that popular. But let's show you some of the things that will really help you with this. There's Diane's. Diane's done several Lucy skeletons, one for Joe in England. You can see her in the picture on the top right-hand side. And there's the newest one in the middle. And on the left, by the way, he's not a display, but we have called him Homo erector because he's a builder and he comes in and he puts things together for us. And say thank you very much to Dave for doing that. There's Diane, the original gluer together. Yes, that's what we've done. We've taken the bones supplied in our Lucy kit and put them together. And we have a whole room exposing all the ape men and really exposing the truth about God creating man in his image. And that's what evolution is all about. Evolution wants to deny man was made in God's image and is therefore accountable to God, even for diet. And the reality is, the Bible has a very specific statement about God creating everything, plants, animals, etc. And we'll be talking about the diet there tonight. Yes, we have lots of explanatory, I call them infomurals, alongside of our skulls and skull casts. And we deal with the real history of brains. And surprisingly, do you realize that the fossil people had bigger brain space than you and I have got? Quite amazing. Perhaps that's the reason Noah could build a boat without going to boat school at all. Oh, and look at our latest acquisition. Well, if you don't recognize a dragon, yes, dragons are mentioned in the Bible, but of course we have, this is a new one, just went up on Friday. Thank you, Diane, for erecting that. You might have done it yesterday, that's right. And there's Des with our other dragon. Oh, this one is known as Draco Rex. You see the similarity between these two? This one was commercially available, so he just went up yesterday. There's Des. And there's our skull cast of Draco Rex. Draco Rex, by the way, Draco means dragon. It's in the Greek. And here is a skeleton skull. Of course, the latest theory is that these skulls with all of these horns are baby Pachycephalosaurus. Pachycephalosaurus, you might remember, is Ken Ham's favourite dinosaur word from years ago. But they're calling this one Stygiomoloch, the demon from the river Styx. Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, we can actually show you all of these when the museum is open, because we were planning on having an open day today, but keep listening to what's happened to that. We have a great display on Aboriginal history and then coming to Australia, and you will learn an awful lot about the real history of the world from the Tower of Babel to the present day, and none of it took 65,000 years, nor even 10,000 years. No, my darling wife is not on display. She was put into a nursing home last week. She's been there 1 week today exactly. I pray for her, because the nurses know her as the lady with the lovely smile. She does know Jesus, and both of us are finding it hard at the moment, but she is able to feed herself. Right, that's wonderful. I'll tell you why, because our program today is about feeding, and the reason Anna's in the care home is she's lost the use of her legs, and it makes it really hard to get in out of bed without special slings, etc. We don't know what caused it. We've got a few suspicions about COVID and that. No, we don't know how to fix it. So one reason we are not having the open day today is because of Anne's situation. But we do encourage you to go to creationresearch.net, because everything we're doing today has been done before in a real section by Diane or myself or some of the others. So search diet for quite a few of the questions that will come up today. And we're going to actually give to Diane now and ask her to come on and talk about some of the slides that you've got, please, Diane, on a big picture of creation, evolution, diet, etc. You want to take that over, please, Diane?
Yes, if we can go to my slides. Yes, it's always good to put things into the history of the world, because we are told a very different history of the world. If you watch any of the secular science programs or read any of the commercial programs. And so this is the standard story of how we got to eat what we eat. Somehow we used to be some kind of great ape, which evolved, and the apes are vegetarian. They do actually attack one another. They're not as sort of calm and gentle and peaceful as people would like to think, but they're basically vegetarian. And somehow these evolved into hominids, sort of ape men, if you like, who had a mixed diet, and by some miracle they discovered fire, and therefore they were able to cook, and that extended the range of things that they could eat. And these evolved into archaic humans who were hunter-gatherers, you know, the caveman, and you've probably read about the paleo diet. And that's quite trendy at the moment, and it's purely based on evolution, that somehow we evolved from archaic humans who went and hunted down big hairy mammoths and things like that. And these eventually evolved into modern humans who domesticated plants and animals and took up farming. And so we have the sort of mixed diet that most of us eat now. And of course, diet is a very, very big thing in the commercial world. And you hear all sorts of conflicting stories. So we're not going to tell you individually what to eat. The one size fits all is no longer relevant for diets, of course. We're going to put it into the big picture of why we do eat what we eat, why animals eat what they eat, and are there some things that we shouldn't eat for biblical reasons? And it turns out that there are, and we'll get to that later on. So let's go back to the beginning. In the beginning, we were actually vegetarian. or people were vegetarian, because this was the first instructions we have about diet. God said, behold, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth. And it's interesting that all of the plants that we eat these days, just about all of them are seed-bearing plants, what the biologists call angiosperms. The only exception I can think of to that is seaweed, but even it does reproduce, but not by the sort of seeds that you have in land plants. So that gives you a tremendous variety of plants, but there are some plants that we can't eat today for food biological reasons. But anyway, let's move on. And the first place to eat was a beautiful, fruitful garden. So a garden restaurant, if you like. Out of the ground, the Lord God made to spring up every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. And just as an aside, have you ever thought what it might have smelled like? It would have been full of beautiful, fruity, floral smells. And it is really interesting. Recently, someone did a whole study of what sort of fragrances people consider to be beautiful and pleasing and what ones they consider to be horrible. And it had nothing to do with different cultures. It was almost universal that fruity floral smells, and particularly things like vanilla, were recognized as pleasing. And if you want to know what the most disgusting ones were, it was a chemical that's found in sweaty feet, but we won't go there. But anyway, so we have this beautiful, very good world. And remember, the Lord God said that when he'd finished everything, it was very good. This was a world not of kill or be killed, eat or be eaten. It was a world of cooperation and a world of beauty and perfection. So the biblical diet history before everything went wrong, Adam and Eve lived in this beautiful, fruitful garden. They ate plants, and all the animals ate plants as well. And that's specifically listed in Genesis as well. Sadly, things didn't last very long, didn't stay very good. So after the fall, Adam and Eve and their immediate descendants, they became farmers. It specifically says that as part of God's judgment, that yes, you will still eat plants, but it will be hard work getting them. And we know that Adam and Eve's family, they cultivated plants for food. They also kept animals, but they didn't eat them. They were for sacrifice and for fibers, because now, as well as having different living conditions in lots of ways, we also wore clothes. Now, that wasn't for the climate. It was part of God's judgment to remind us that we are sinners and we need our sins to be covered. This went on for over 1,000 years, or about 1,600 years, of course, and the earth became more and more corrupt, and eventually God judged the entire world with the great flood. This covered the entire earth. It destroyed that original very good world, and the environment has continued to degenerate ever since then. And so that's going to affect what people and animals can eat. So we no longer live in the beautiful good world, which was full of everything being cooperative instead of being in competition. And so after the flood, God tells Noah things are going to be different, but he's not going to send another worldwide flood. But he does tell Noah about the first climate change. While the earth remains, there will be seed time and harvest, cold and heat. So there'll be regular patterns and cycles. There'll be summer and winter. So you'll get extremes of seasons and day and night. And so in this changing climate and degenerating environment, God gives some new rules about what we can eat. And so he says that into your hands they, meaning every moving thing, we'll come back to that in a minute, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. So there was a big change in the environment, and therefore there was a big change in what we could eat, because there's going to be some place in the world now where you can't eat fresh green plants all year round, because there'll be periods where they won't grow, and there will be places where green plants won't grow very well throughout the year. And so God says, as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. So this is a distinct change in what we were to eat. So after the flood, God gave Noah and his family, and therefore all their descendants, permission to kill and eat animals and birds and fish, so all the things that move. Now, there were no restrictions on what kinds of creatures. The Jewish food laws didn't come in until the law of Moses. So how did our diets change? Why did they change after the flood? What was the sort of ruling force? Well, I came across this interesting sign one day at Kew Gardens, and I think it summarized how we can explain why we eat what we eat in different places. When the environment changes, you either move, you adapt, or you go extinct. And in fact, that is what has happened since the flood. Animals and people have had to either move, adapt, or go extinct. And in fact, there was a big movement that happened after the judgment at the Tower of Babel. People were dispersed from where they had all been together, and they often ended up in places where there were harsh climates, and they would have become more dependent on animal foods. So we've gone from the beautiful good world of cooperation and where everything worked together to a harsh climate where it is really a struggle for life. So after the flood, this is where natural selection and human selection comes in to determining which particular animals and plants survive. And part of it is that we choose particular animals and plants that are good for us. And so they do well, but also they have to do well in the natural environment, of course. Now, some people did actually lose the ability to become farmers. So we've gone from gardeners to farmers to hunter-gatherers. And that's change, but it's a decrease. It's a loss. And so hunter-gathering is actually a loss of technology. It's not the original culture. So what about animals? How did their diets change? Because remember, they started out as vegetarian as well, but they're certainly not vegetarian now. And it was a case of surviving while they can. Animals and people can only live where there's food available, of course. And so adaptation is also a real process. It's not an evolutionary process. It means being able to use already existing features in order to apply them to new challenges. So in this case, it's new food sources. And sadly, natural selection has applied in harsh environments. Some animals have died out and some plants have died out. And as part of this general decrease in the complexity and beauty and functionality of the world, a lot of plants would have become less nutritious. Now, there's also another interesting change in relation to animals after the flood. God made this interesting statement: the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and every bird of the heavens and everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish in the sea. In other words, animals are going to now fear man. Now, is this God just being mean to us? Well, no, it's not. It's actually a result of human sin, because we know from our own recent history some animals have been hunted to extinction because of human aggression and human greed. So God was trying to preserve some of these from our own sinfulness. Sorry. So how did animals develop their current diets? Well, they had to avoid humans for survival, but also they had to find food as best they could. And so some animals became scavengers and carnivores. So we no longer live in the world of beautiful cooperation. We live in a world of competition. And so we have scavenging and animals eating other animals. And it's predators and prey, survival of the fittest, the struggle for life. So animals and birds would have dispersed into this degenerating environment, and they would have used whatever features they already have to get food. So if an animal has sharp teeth, or if it's a bird, a sharp beak or claws, if it's agile, if it's fast, right, those things don't make an animal a carnivore. However, they will facilitate it. So animals and birds that already had these features could become carnivores if they needed to be. And a specific example of that is a little bird in New Zealand, actually, that we've actually observed this happen. It's a type of alpine parrot. It does have sharp beak and it has claws, and that is good for eating fruits and nuts and digging up roots and eating different sorts of plant shoots. Now, sharp teeth and claws are useful for doing that, but they're also useful for digging up grubs and other little invertebrates. If the bird can't find some plant foods to eat, it knows it needs nutrition and will scrounge around and find whatever it could. Now, when that wild food became scarce, the parrots actually started to attack sheep, and they became quite a nuisance, but I think they're protected now. But the overall picture of biblical biology in relation to diet is the same as the overall picture of biblical biology. When we look at living things, yes, we see the evidence of creation, we see design, but we also see violence and stress and struggle, and we see mutations. We might mention some of those later on if we get a chance. We see lots of natural selection or survival of the fittest, and we see death and extinction. So we've gone from the very good world of cooperation and beauty and perfection to the world of animals eating other animals and attacking one another. And if we can come back to us now, I think we can move on and have a look at some more specific examples of what to eat or what things are eating and why they're eating them.
Diane, you and I discussed a question which came in, and
yes.
it's actually from a creationist website claiming the evidence of design that the mosquito is marvelous evidence of God's design. And I kid you not, you can look up the website if you want to find out what it is. And it talks about, it's got a proboscis with brilliant muscle structure and penetration, and it's designed to suck blood. Now, Diane, that doesn't quite sound like it fits into Genesis 1, where all the creatures are meant to be vegetarian. So would you give us your understanding of mosquitoes and proboscis? And, well, I don't even know what the plural is for a proboscis, but anyway, tell us what you found out.
Yes, well, the proboscis is the long, sharp tube that it uses to actually suck up its food. Now, the interesting thing is that they don't have to suck blood. In fact, male mosquitoes don't suck blood. That they live on plant juices. And so the proboscis, which does have a sharp end, is equally good for sucking up plant juices as it is for sucking blood. And so as it already had that feature, it can use it for other purposes if need be. And that's where the other purpose and the need comes in. For the female mosquitoes, when they have to come to lay eggs, they need some extra nutrients, and particularly they need iron. Now, what's a good source of iron? Well, it turns out human blood, or any blood, is actually a good source of iron. The red stuff in our blood is an iron-containing chemical, and human blood is particularly easy to get at because we're not covered with a layer of fur. And so what is well designed for sucking up plant juices, and female mosquitoes will also feed on nectar and plant juices when they just need energy. But when they need these extra nutrients, they will go out looking for them, and they will just take advantage of what's ever available. Human skin is available with blood quite close to the surface, so it is using what equipment, as it were, it already has for another purpose, because we now live in the fallen world which doesn't provide those nutrients from other sources. So it's a classic case of the good to bad to worse history of the world, which is what we try to help people understand in creation research.
Now, Diane, you've been to my place many times. You know I love orchids.
Yes.
And I'll be honest, one of the things I found hard to believe is the statement in Genesis that all the creatures ate plants, because my yard is also full of swampy water. Down the bottom, we've got a big dam, and the mosquitoes love it, and therefore they love us. But if you are very observant, you soon will notice that it's only the female mosquitoes that put the bite on you. Now, I won't make any morals out of that, like one of our readers has made some anti-feminist suggestions on the side there. But in reality, growing orchids really helped me, because I've noticed that there are quite a few orchids that are fertilized by the strangest things, including miniature frogs, miniature toads that actually get into the flower because it's so tiny or so big, and they actually go down to the bottom and they get the nectar and move back out. And this is true of the mosquitoes. I've actually cut them in half, and you can watch the mosquito inside come in, suck up the nectar. Now, he went in there for the nectar. There's nothing else in there that would interest him at all. And the female can do this too, but she stops doing it when she needs the iron to get in her reproductive system. But you can watch him suck up the blood, suck up the nectar, and then he will escape out a special part of the flower and take the pollen with him and deposit it on another flower. So there is an original design for a sucking, an original need for a sucker who will actually be able to squeeze out a flower and get the pollen on his back that we never even think of. And in schools, you don't get taught about the benefits of the good design in the beginning. So the reason I'm mentioning that is, all you creationists out there, don't look at the present and assume that what you see now, mosquitoes that bite you, spread malaria and all that sort of thing, is part of God's cleverness in design. The cleverness is certainly in the sucker. The cleverness is certainly in the ability to detect what food it needs, but the cleverness is built into it from the beginning, when everything was very good. And I don't know if you've got diseases from mosquitoes or whatever, but none of them are very good at all. So they were not present in the beginning. So it's a caution, isn't it, Diane? We need to not look at the world. In fact, I brought in a couple of other things today. You can give me the whole screen if you like, Sam, because I take these things here to give my wife down at the care home. She likes eating grapes. Now, these are degenerate grapes, actually, because no crunch. There's no seeds in there. So you don't have to sort of spit out. Delicious. These, by the way, are not the original grapes. The original grapes all had seeds. And we have noticed, farmers have noticed, that if you plant the grapes, occasionally one of them will be formed without a seed in it. And you take a cutting off that bunch and plant it, and all of a sudden you have a seedless bunch of grapes. So don't assume because things have no seed now, they never had seeds. The seedless grapes may be sweet, they may be easy to eat, but they are part of the fallen world. And I mean, I live in Queensland. Do you recognize that fruit? I'm getting a free breakfast on this program, I tell you. I'm very fruitarian. But the one thing you can't see, can you see? Well, there's almost no seeds in there. Now, in Queensland, derogatorily by those people who live in Tasmania and Canberra, we're known as banana benders. It's meant to be an insult. But we grow more bananas than anybody else in the rest of Australia. But none of them have seeds. But Diane, you've been up to my place and seen some of my wild bananas. We've actually peeled them off. What do you notice is inside the wild bananas?
Well, the wild bananas do actually have seeds.
Yeah, they do.
Yes.
And the seeds are big, and you can crunch on them if they like. They're not very nice.
No, they're not.
In reality, many plants in this world are also victim of good to bad to worse. Now, I honestly don't know how you would have dealt with wild bananas. That you have to scrape the tiny bit of flesh from around the seeds. I mean, I don't like pomegranates for that reason. You end up spitting seeds out like a submachine gun. Is that what they're meant to be like? Sometimes you'll find loss of seeds is not natural. Loss of seeds is caused by us choosing something. Might be a mutation in the beginning, but we've made it to our advantage. Whether it's the bananas who have lost their seeds and we've taken advantage of, we don't know. They still exist, wild bananas. They still have massive big seeds and nobody eats them at all. I don't even know of an animal that eats them. But again, the caution, Diane, nobody should take the present and extrapolate it backwards, correct?
No, that's right. We can study the present now, but we need to put that in the context of the history. So that's why it's important to know the biblical history of the world, the real history of the world.
Okay, and I did notice, I think it was Doki who put a question up about the parrots in New Zealand. Now, I've been to New Zealand many, many times, looked at the kea parrots, looked at their sharp beak, and you would say that sharp beak is well designed to kill things. But the question Doki asked was, how did they get to do that? Well, we can give you a specific example. Again, you can blame the British. I didn't mean to be nasty about that, and Joe's not here, so I'm not picking on him at all. But in reality, when you look at the Scots and the English and the habits of what they've done, I mean, the clearances in Scotland, my family's associated with that, right? Now, the English came in and they discovered that they could get more money out of putting sheep on their properties than they could getting the local inhabitants to be farmers and just raise a few oats. The same policy in New Zealand. You take your sheep out there, what have you got to do? Clear the land to grow grass. Now, kea parrots don't do too well on grass, but they did discover that if you kill a dead sheep, or a sheep, sorry, you can't kill a sheep. If you actually eat a dead sheep, particularly the food in its stomach, the sheep has been eating the grass that have seeds on it. So the kea parrots discovered an alternative source of food. And then they discovered that, number one, it was easy to eat a dead sheep, no fight at all. And then they discovered, because you can read the history records, and we've got a picture, a photograph in our files of the first kea observed eating a dead sheep. So we know what the history of it has been. I've made a good collection of all of these things. And then they discovered it's easy to kill a dead sheep because it's already dead. But then 3 or 4 of them can attack a baby lamb and kill it. Sharp beaks, well designed to kill things? No, well designed to rip up nuts and everything else that other parakeets do. Then they discovered that 20 or 30 of them could bring down an adult live sheep. So again, the point that Diane and I and everyone on the team wants to make is, don't assume that by what you're doing now, it's always been that way. Look at it in the perspective, everything was very good. Everything ate plants. Everything was vegetarian. And the history of the world, particularly after the flood, has been a sad downturn. Now, Joe asked me to bring up something. He's not here. Otherwise, I would have pummeled him with the Hallelujah diet, because it became very popular quite a while ago. And it's largely a diet of uncooked food. Maybe 85% is uncooked, raw food, green food, nuts, etc. And if you can say it does anything, I think you could probably say it causes you to lose weight. Why? Because it takes you so long to get ready for eating all this thing. But overall, it's not the diet that God gave us. God told us we could eat every green plant. God told us we could eat all the fruits on the plants. So no, we weren't created just to eat fruits. We were created to eat the plants that had seeds and were herbs. Now, herbs doesn't describe fruit in any way, shape or form. So Shogiwa's question there really is a very important one, but we were not designed just to eat fruit. If you try that, by the way, you end up being a big purchaser of toilet paper. It really is helpful for your bowels. But if you look at the Hallelujah diet, it makes lots of interesting claims. It has a semi-biblical basis, but it is not overall the diet that God gave us, particularly after Noah's flood. And we'll come back to that. So, Sam, lead us through some of the other questions, mate.
All right, great stuff. Let me come back out of full screen there. Right, okay, so we've got some thanks to give out first. Don't know why I quite went high there, but never mind. We've got thanks to give out to Doki Doki Barber Club for 199 US buckaroos. A thumbs up. Thank you very much, Doki. God bless you. And of course, Neil Grindley coming in with 10 British buckaroos. God bless you, Neil. Thank you so much. Right. Okay. So, this is an interesting question. Doki Doki asks, why don't animals just evolve photosynthesis?
Diane, you want to handle that one?
Well, photosynthesis is actually a very, very complex process that involves not just one molecule of chlorophyll, which is the one we know about, but for it to work, it actually has to be set in a context of a whole lot of other molecules, and some of them are great big proteins, and they have to be organized within a cell so that one molecule does something in the process and then passes it on to the next one, which then passes it on to the next one in order to extract that energy from the sunlight. So you can't just sit down and think, well, I'm going to evolve photosynthesis. You have to have an enormous amount of genetic information that clicks in at the right time. And that's one thing we're learning about genetics now. It's not just what genes you have, but also when they're turned on and off, how much they're turned on and off, and which ones are turned on at the same time as which other ones. So it's a far more complicated process than just being able to evolve chlorophyll.
Now, if you're a turtle, you probably would have ignored Diane's answers there, because you already have a source of chlorophyll in your diet when you eat some of the jellyfishes, because the jellyfishes, which almost look like transparent glue, actually sometimes have little organelles in them, which they borrow from the ground, and they have chlorophyll in them. So you get a much better diet as you eat jellyfish than otherwise you would think. I mean, I've been fishing on Moreton Bay all my life, and you take your motorboat out and you dive through millions of jellyfish, and you hear cut, cut, slice, slice, slice. Of course, it is helpful to know that those jellyfish bits will regenerate. So turtles have got a guaranteed food supply, but it's not something that jellyfish is evolving. It's something it's taking in from an environment which is already there. So a good reminder, Diane. Anything else, Sam?
Yeah, I just a comment on that. Some animals actually do have a symbiotic relationship with photosynthetic critters called zooxanthellae. For example, clams, like giant clams and corals, they have. But it's not part of the clam itself. But it actually helps make the clams look incredibly beautiful. And interestingly, when the clams get stressed, they'll expel the zooxanthellae. And they'll become bleached, have a bleached appearance. So, it's a complex symbiotic relationship where they both benefit, but the clam itself doesn't have chlorophyll.
Yeah, I believe that the same is true for corals, Craig, although I've never had a chance to check that. That little old me wants to know about eating jellyfish. If you want to try it yourself, collect the ones on the mud that are drying out so they're less jelly-like. You might find they've got a slightly salty flavour. You won't put on weight at all. You'll soon desire some other food, though.
Stick to aeroplane jelly.
Okay, any other, Sam?
Yeah, sure. We can do this one here from Shogiwa. Question. Part 1. Vishkal Mangalwadi says that before the fall, humans were fruitarians, eating fruits and seeds, and animals were vegetarian, and there was no overlapping between the food humans and animals ate. After the fall, humans then became vegetarian. Have you heard of this distinction before, and what do you think of it?
Anybody want to have a go at that one?
It says I've given you all green plants. I don't think it says just the fruit part of the plant.
Yeah, Genesis 1:29 says, I've given you all the green herbs of the field. And then Genesis 2 says he's given you the trees with the fruit on it. So before the fall, we ate both. Yeah. If you try eating only fruit, I told you before, you end up in the loo an awful lot.
Yes, all the plants that we eat except for seaweed are actually seed-bearing plants. They're angiosperm plants, which are the flowering seed-bearing plants.
Seaweed is nice to eat, in my opinion, too, you need to know. Coming from the Scottish background, where we harvest the seaweed, it's got a nice tangy, iodine, salty flavour.
No, I agree.
I can attest to that because this is an empty packet of Itsu crispy seaweed thins.
Yes.
Only 24 calories per pack, folks. So get them while you're hot.
No, 100%. Love them.
Yeah, no, 100%. I can very much attest. Seaweed is a very good snack. It's been used by the Japanese for sushi and things like that for centuries.
Japanese have got it down to a fine art.
Oh yeah, well, everything in Japan is down to a fine art, Craig. Let's be honest.
Craig, right, didn't you say that you sold seahorses to the Japanese to eat?
Chinese.
Oh, sorry about that. No racial slur intended. What do they use seahorses for?
Well, seahorses are meant to be a traditional medicine. They're meant to be good for you. Interestingly, it's only been found recently, even though it's been historically used by the Chinese for many centuries, that they do actually have some of the materials in them that make them good for what they said that they're good for. For example, it's meant to be good for asthma. It's meant to be good for your joints and so on. And it's been found that seahorses have omega-3 fatty acids, which are good for asthma and joints and a few other things like that. So whether that's coincidental or it's something that they actually knew historically, I don't know. It's also meant to be good for male fertility. And as someone that's tried a bit of seahorse, I can attest to the fact I've got 6 children now. So you never know. Maybe it really does work.
Perhaps you should all send your orders into Seahorse World in Tasmania and get your omega-3 fatty acids from Craig Hawkins. That helps our ministry, I'm sure it does. Sam, I can see one last question for this moment from little old me. Could God have made us so we do not need to eat? Now, the reason I picked on that one is I still remember a now vet. He came to me one day while he was a student and he said, our lecturer has just given a lecture on how the human body could not have been designed, because how stupid it is to have to eat food at this end and it has to travel an awful long distance before it even gets to your stomach, and then it has to go miles before it gets out. He said, wouldn't it be better if you had a mouth round about where your tummy button was? Diane, you got any comments on that? Could God have made us so we don't need to eat? Could he have made us with a different stomach like that? Just plop a orange in the middle and push?
Well, actually, I do remember reading a science fiction story where they made up this sort of alien being that that had its mouth separated from its nose. But no, that's actually a good piece of design, that we have a mouth and a nose that do have some sort of connection. And we did a program on that a while ago about the design in the human body, but going back to it, it does start in the mouth. It doesn't start in the stomach. It starts in the mouth when you are actually chewing things up. So you're physically breaking up food, and you're also starting to add the first lot of enzymes, which are the chemical digesters. That's in our saliva. So the process of digestion does start in the mouth. So it's not inefficient to have to put food in the mouth and then have it go down through your chest, through a long pipe, in order to get to your stomach. But the other reason that our mouth and our nose need to be connected, it's a backup system for our breathing, because you can go without food for quite a long time. You cannot go without air for very long. So if your nose gets blocked for some reason or other, someone gives you a punch in the nose or you have a bad cold, you can breathe through your mouth. So, and there are systems in that to close off the food part of it while you're breathing and close off the breathing part while you're swallowing. It's a really neat piece of design with a good backup system.
Well, I told the young vet, I said, wouldn't kissing be awkward if your mouth was down where your tummy button is? But anyway, we won't pursue that one. Okay, I have a couple of examples here before I take over with my section, Sam, and I'll get you to bring the PowerPoint up in a moment. I bought in an orange carrot. Now, I just didn't say carrot because having studied carrots, having grown carrots ever since I was a kid, the one thing I know is they're crunchy, they grate well, they're full of healthy stuff, but they never were orange in the beginning. The orange ones, by the way, were bred by the Dutch farmers from purple ones, which have a slight tad of orange in them. Why would they do such a thing? Not necessarily because they're healthier, but because the House of Orange ruled Holland. And if you want to sell a product, make it orange. So politics and plants can't be separated in the history of the world. So they're good for you. And the orange ones, the purple ones, I can't say I really like the purple ones. I think they're a little bit bitter, but they're actually still pretty good for you. I bought in also some nice cheese. Now, cheese is not a plant product directly. The cows eat the grass. They then digest and recycle a few things. You know all about their funny stomach system. And then you milk the cow. Now, the first mention of milk products being used for food is back in Genesis. Abraham was knowing about those sort of things. So did God make cows so we could use them? Is cheese a vegetarian product? Well, it sort of falls on the middle line, but it's certainly been used by godly people for a long time. And it's not directly an animal product. But you'd find when you deal with these things, as we come further from creation, perfection, through sin, down to Noah's flood, and onto the other side, some of these distinctions become harder and harder to make. The carrots are no longer purple, but they are pretty nice. The cheese, well, I'll tell you a funny thing. You see these grapes? My dog loves grapes. You see these carrots? My dogs eat raw carrots. Do you see this potato? My dog digs up my potato patch and eats them, the dirty wretch. And if I get the cheese out of the fridge and I start to open it, I'll have dog immediately. He can hear cheese wrapping. I don't know how far away, but he can certainly associate the wrapping sound with the cheese. All of these things actually are not just human food. But don't be surprised. The Bible says he made the green plants, he made the herbs of the field for all the creatures to eat. Now, I'm sure that includes many fruits. In fact, we still know that if you go to South America, there is film of actually the alligators there jumping up in the floods and grabbing fruits off the trees. And I believe Joe, if he was here, would probably have a little film clip of snakes doing the same thing. So the fact that they don't today, Diane said, check what they are designed for and what they could have used there. Now things we see as bad, with the venom and all of that. But in the beginning, it was all very good. So put your biblical glasses on. Sam, would you put me slide screen back up, please? Okay. All right. Now you'll see that slide that's there. It's one of Diane's slides. It's where she was going to finish her program that she and I talked about. But it's a good point about remembering the beginning. Cooperation is the norm in God's creation. So that anything you see as a parasite probably began in a good relationship with people. Anything you see as a germ causer probably began as a good relationship with whatever animal or plant it was in. But when you look at the creation, perfection, fall, present, and post-flood with the change of environment, I mean, if you're a zebra living in Africa and all of a sudden there's no grass and trees to eat, then the lion actually starts on the zebra and the zebra dies out if there's no plants. So you find that many animals with enough brains will have changed their diets, and we do the same. We find enough food to eat that meets our needs regardless of what we were doing. All right, now, Diane, we've discussed the mozzie. When we have a look at this stuff, isn't the red stuff in meat blood? Okay, now, Diane, I often get people come to me because I don't mind my steak a little rare. I don't want it so rare it climbs on its feet and crawls off the plate. But you get asked that question. I get asked this question. Would you like to take over in the next section, because you're our medical biologist? And after this, we're going to bring Craig and Glenn in, because I think Glenn, he's experienced with alligators, stuffing them and eating them and all sorts of stuff. And Craig, well, he's got some poisonous stuff that he could talk about as well. So, Diane, would you like to take over with your PowerPoints?
Yes, if we can go back to my slideshow. Thanks. Yes, there we are. Let's see if we can get it to go. Yes, the whole issue of blood is an interesting one, because there is a food that is specifically made out of blood. So it's early morning here in Australia. So would you like a big British breakfast, otherwise known as a full English? Could you eat that in terms of the biblical laws? Well, the answer is yes, you can, except for one thing: the blood pudding. Now, if you are a Scotsman, you might like to go out on a haggis hunt and slay a haggis. Well, only joking, but anyway, can you eat haggis in the light of what we've discussed about biblical biology and the changes that have happened in diet over the history of the world? So we can even expand that out. Can you eat black pudding or these various other types of blood sausages? And we found out from someone who wrote into the Ask site about a dish called chocolate meat, which is a Filipino dish, and it is actually where you cook things in blood. And the answer is no. And it's not because of a biological reason, it is because of a biblical reason. Now, we can go back into the Old Testament, and in the law of Moses, there are quite strict rules about eating blood. No person among you shall eat blood. Now, neither shall any stranger who sojourns away. So in other words, even the people who were from outside of Israel but living within Israel weren't supposed to eat blood. And that's an important point, that if you want to live in God's culture, as it were, God's nation, you had to obey God's laws. And God goes on and gives some more specific details about how to prepare animals for in order to eat them. So there's no biblical mandate for vegetarianism now. It's a choice that you may have if you live in an environment where there are good, nutritious plants. But it's not something that we can impose on other people on the basis of the Bible. But going back to blood, in the New Testament, there's also teaching about blood, where the apostles were asked, well, how do we help the Gentiles in terms of how they should live? What rules should they live by? And for the Jews, this was a case of, well, what do we eat now? Because food laws were very much embedded in the law of Moses. For the Gentiles, they had to struggle with how do we free ourselves from the pagan gods, and the pagan gods and the worship of the pagan gods was very much taken up with what they should eat as well. And so the apostles gave this teaching that they should abstain from food sacrifice to idols, from blood, and from what has been strangled, and from sexual immorality. So this was the summary of how they should live and what they should eat. Bible's very practical, talks about all sorts of things, not just sort of spiritual, emotional sorts of things. And so what happened was the apostles' teaching on diet didn't go back to Eden, and it didn't go back to Moses. It actually went back to Noah, because Noah was told that, yes, you may eat every moving, living thing, but you were not to eat the blood, because the life was in the blood. And so let's go back to practical details. What about what we eat now? Can you eat steak? Yes, you can. And meat processed in a modern day abattoir does have the blood drained out. So that fits with the apostles' teaching. Now, can you eat blue steak? This is where we get to the bit about, well, it looks like it's got blood in it, even though it's called blue steak. And basically, blue steak is steak that's hardly been cooked at all. It's effectively raw. Yes, you can, because that red fluid is not actually blood. There are other iron-containing proteins within flesh, within animal flesh, and one in particular is myoglobin, and it's an iron-containing protein that's specific to muscle cells. We need to, which enables the muscle cells to store oxygen. And it's what makes red meat red. They have a lot of myoglobin in them, but also white meats also have myoglobin. So yes, you can eat your steaks effectively raw if that's what you fancy them, if that's what you like. You're not eating blood, so you don't need to fear that you are disobeying the biblical mandate. It does actually all fit when you put it, again, if you put it into the proper history of the world and what God's instructions are, what the instructions were to Moses, and then what the instructions are to the church through the apostles. So if we can come back to us and we can move on. So I'm sure there are some other interesting questions coming up.
And just coming out of what you said, the important part here was the apostles went back to Noah's time and took the teaching that God gave Noah, because you and I still live in a post-flood world. It's certainly post-Edenic, it's post-fall, but the biggest impetus and the biggest controlling factor is the new weather that came in. You will see summer, you'll see winter, you'll have rain, you'll have heat, you'll have dry. That's the world we live in, the one that Noah would live in. And what I find really interesting is the number of Christians, particularly those influenced by the Levitical rules for the Jews on eating pork, eating monkeys, or anything like that. You will notice when God gave Noah permission to eat meat, he did not exclude any animals, right? There's no pigs excluded. There's no monkeys excluded. Noah was told he could eat anything that moved. He just was not to eat the blood. And that's the position that the apostles took, because the Holy Spirit directed them. They needed to tell this to the pagans. Now, I don't know if you've eaten raw meat. No. Yes, I have, because I wanted to experiment on one thing. Does it taste any different than cooked meat? And the answer is not much at all. It's got a different texture. And often the texture is what we like, rather than the ooey gooey, soft, fleshy taste of stringy meat. It's the texture that changes when you cook it, not the flavor greatly. Some of you who like sushi will have already noticed that. You know, when you get your raw pink salmon that's not cooked, the taste is pretty much the same as cooked salmon, but the texture is quite different. So again, it's important when you say, what should I be eating? No, please don't become a Levitical. You can eat this on that day, you can eat something else, but make sure you say, this is God's general rule for the world that has descended from Noah. The world that is post-Noahic, the animals that got off Noah's Ark, God knew how many there would be. God knew what we'd do to them with our sinful desire. In fact, I suspect that in Australia, with our new display we have on Aboriginals and the history of Australia, one reason the giant animals disappeared, giant kangaroos, giant lizards, etc., is that they were the easiest to hunt, right? Particularly if you live in a country which is drying out, which has started to do after the flood. They would have killed off the big ones first, leaving goannas that are this big, whereas they used to be 10 or 15 meters long. So there's all sorts of implications here. So Sam, before Craig and Joe take over, Craig and Glenn take over, any other new questions that came in? Or any other things?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a bit. Obviously, we've been talking about life being in the blood, and Shogiwa put the the verse up in Leviticus. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I give it to you on the altar to make an atonement for your souls. Is the blood by reason of the life that makes atonement. That's a wonderful sort of precursor to Christ himself, because it's by Christ's blood that we are washed clean. and he gives us eternal life, as it says within John 6, 53 to 55. Then Jesus said to them, most assuredly I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day. For my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. But yeah, so I just wanted to sort of point that out, because you know, this is why it's important to really study scripture, because you can find these little connections, and it's a brilliant thing to dive into. Right, okay, so let's dive into some questions. So let's do this one here. Alan Feffner says, with genetic modification to seeds and fruits in general, are we losing the goodness that had been created by the Lord in these foods?
Read that again, Sam, and slowly.
With genetic modification to seeds and fruits in general, are we losing the goodness that had been created by the Lord in these foods?
Anybody got any comments on that?
Well, there may be a certain amount of degradation in the goodness through genetic modification, I would think, but I think probably the biggest influencer of that is the changes in the nutrients in the soils that's available to the plant to use. So it's known that some of the trace elements in some of the crops around the place, for example, are on the decline. So we don't get some of those trace elements that we need in our bodies through the foods that we're eating. I don't know about the genetic modification so much. Maybe Diane might have a little bit to say about that.
Craig,
I think it's a combination, because it's also our bodies are breaking down, our bodies are changing and are not able to assimilate a lot of them. I mean, one of the latest is that people are going on to gluten-free diets, and they're claiming that, well, the breeders are breeding more gluten in the wheat, but they find that the gluten contents are the same, but our bodies are having trouble assimilating. So, yeah, I do think plants, it's a fall. The plants are subject to the curse as well. And there's surely genetic modification to the seeds and the fruits, but there also is to us and our ability to digest them and assimilate them. So, it's all
there's
the fall.
Pretty sure that's a good line to take, Glenn, because I remember we in third year genetics, we were studying plant modification by genetic modification and some of the factors that influence it. And a rather famous discovery made in Australia was that if you were a farmer, how come you always had good clover growing under the power lines? And they discovered that was because a tiny amount of copper would wash out of the power lines, and if it landed on the ground, the plants thrived, right? So it's a minor element in the plants, but without that, the plants don't do anywhere near as well. So it's not just genetic modification, it's the degradation of the soils as well, the degradation of the climate, and we've been suffering that for a long time. Particularly, it's getting worse towards the present. But that sort of adding trace elements has certainly improved a lot of things. But at the other end, you have the people growing wheat or rice particularly is the classic study, where you grew the rice so you double the size of the head and think you're improving the world's food resources. And the reality is you always pay a price for genetic modification. So those of you into genetics, always look at, if I double the size of the stalk, what happens to the size of the flower? If I double the size of the head, what happens to the quality of the plant? We're not as clever as God. It would be nice if we were, but we aren't. And just remember one thing, when it comes to food, God is the creator of it all, blood included. And he has the right to tell us whether we can or we can't eat anything. I say that as a Mackay whose family has had blood in their diet for a long time. I still remember a long-running argument I had with one lovely Scottish Christian who loved her black pudding. And I just sort of gently, because I used to stay with her on ministry, had to gently bring up the subject that, listen, here's what God's rule is from Noah to the present. Here it is repeated in the book of Acts. And in the end, I'm glad to say she finally conceded that God has the right to tell me whether I can eat blood or not. And the point that Sam made is a really important one. His rule there is associated with the fact that the wages of sin is death. The life is in the blood. So if you are dead, you need new blood. Hence, Christ died on the cross so that his blood shed could become new life for us. So really good point there, Sam. And we must keep that connection very, very clear. It's not just food and facts. Diane, you got anything else to add on that one?
I think we've covered most of the issues there. But the key point there is we're not as smart as God. So we need to study what God has made in order to make the most of it.
All right, Craig, you and Glenn are going to take this next section, dealing with
Sam was going to say something,
all of that. So would you like to take over, Craig?
Yeah. Did Sam, you have a comment that you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I was going to add was to sort of comment on the whole issue of ultra-processed foods. So we're seeing more and more, obviously with things like McDonald's and KFC and Burger King. Side note, we're not sponsored by any of the above. But you see ultra-processed foods and the detrimental effects of all these additives and, preservatives and things like that on the body. And yet, if you go onto the flip side of things, if you go to an all-vegan diet, that in and of itself is the same level, if not even higher, ultra-processed foods being put through and said, oh, this is all vegan, it's all but it's all got so many different additives and extra bits and pieces and things like that. So if we go back to the scriptural way of our diet, looking as to what was given to us originally in the garden was a vegetarian diet, and and obviously things change. We need more of this, more of that, as as our genetics and things like that degrade over time. Good to bad to worse. And yeah, so that's sort of just something I wanted to sort of throw into the mix there. But yeah, we can move on.
Okay, Greg, take it away.
Okay, well, I guess I've just got a brief section, really just questioning about the fact that we've been given every green plant to eat. So if we just duck on my slides there. So there's the passage that we've already referred to a couple of times from Genesis 1. God said, see, I've given you every green herb that yields seed. This is from the New King James Version, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed, to you it shall be for food. So that's to people. And then the next verse is about the animals, also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth in which there is life, I have given every green herb for food. And it was so. So this use of the word herb in the New King James Version is sometimes translated in other versions as green plants, all green plants, because that's what the Hebrew word is actually referring to. Now, slight variation to what Diane said earlier, and you can correct me, Diane, if you like, but pines are not flowering plants per se, but they actually have seeds as well. They're just a different type of seeds. The gymnosperms, for example, just simply means naked seed, so they're fertilized directly. We do eat pine nuts and things like that as well. So I guess you could say that is incorporated within that system as well as outlined there. But the question I've got is, well, if God said that, well, how come there's so many poisonous plants out there that we can't eat? And there's a picture of an oleander, and every part of that plant is highly toxic and can kill you. It's been mentioned to me that even if you broke a stick off it and poked your sausage on the barbecue with it, that could kill you. The sap out of the stick could get into your sausage and kill you. Even burning these and getting a smell of the smoke can be very bad for you as well, I believe. The flowers are poisonous, and in quite a range of plants. I've got some weeds that grow on a little property that I've got out of town here called foxglove. And you shouldn't even touch that plant with your hands because it can be toxic to you. You certainly shouldn't eat it, and it's not good for animals to eat either. So they're definitely green plants. They're definitely flowering plants. They've got seeds and the like, but they are highly poisonous, and most parts of the plant are. This is one that's specifically Australian. This is, cycads are found around the world, but macrozamias are a genus of cycads that are only found in Australia. There's about 40 different species. This one was taken up in the Darwin region in Northern Territory. And cycads superficially look like palms. They're not actually palms. They can be called palm trees, but they're not palms. Palms are actually flowering plants. Cycads are in the gymnosperm group, in other words, closer to the pine trees and the conifers. But they do have a fleshy fruit, and that can be highly toxic as well. They produce a toxin called psychocin, and that can be highly poisonous. People have been known to die from eating it. The fruits, the leaves are poisonous as well. So when the Bible says, "To you I give every green plant," and yet some of the green plants out there are highly toxic, what's going on? This one, in fact, can be eaten, and there's groups of trees within the cycads that can be eaten. There's the Australian nut palm, and there's the chestnut Dion, I think it's called, and they've got edible seeds in them. In fact, the macrozamias, the Aboriginals did learn a way to eat them, and the toxin can be leached out of the seeds. So here's the fruits of some of the cycads. They're like this. They get those fruits, and you can soak them in water, change the water every day for a week, and then cook up the fleshy seed coating and seed and eat it in a sort of pulp. So it's good for you. So in a fashion, you can eat it, but it's got this toxin in it that you need to get rid of. So I guess the short answer to what's gone on is this is part of the fall, and there's been a concentration of some of these harmful toxins in these plants that make it very difficult for us to eat, and animals as well. In fact, animals in Australia in the early days of settlement, and the cattle were allowed to roam wild, they'd eat some of these macrozamias, and they'd lose their ability to walk. They'd lose their capacity to stay upright, and they'd get a disease, it was believed to be, called wobbly leg. So they'd get the wobblies. But when improved pastures started to dominate and people weren't roaming their cattle through the native vegetation so much, then this disease disappeared because they weren't eating the macrozamias. So I'm presuming, and maybe others would like to comment, that this is all part of the fall where some of these toxins have concentrated in certain parts of certain species that have degenerated from the original created kind.
Craig, perhaps I can throw in a bit of genetics that might help. With many plants, you can increase the size of the flower or whatever by doubling the number of chromosomes in a cell. Now, this is a fairly normal happenstance in plant worlds, so I suspect that the basic genetic set of the plant is non-toxic. The more you double the number of chromosomes, the more toxic it gets, because the genetic components don't seem to multiply proportionally to the exact number of chromosomes they have. Some become more dominant, and in fact you see this in some of the vegetables we eat that are bordering on the edge of toxicity. Those of you who like rosemary as a flavoring, I warn you, don't eat it every day, don't eat it twice a day, because it's a cumulative toxin. The actual fragrance that you like is toxic to you, but below a certain amount your body will cope with it. Above a certain amount your body won't cope with it. In fact, having run food survival clubs, the one thing I will warn you if you come to Australia, don't follow the eating habits of parakeets or parrots. They can take 20 or 30 times the arsenic than the human being can do. So many of these plants they can get away with but they will prefer to eat plants that are not toxic, just like you will. So, Glenn, perhaps you want to throw in, and then we'll throw it up for our final question time. You want to bring in?
I was just going to say, yeah, we have poisonous plants. One of the famous ones here is poke salad, because when it's young, you can pick the leaves, and people, will make it into a salad. But as it gets older, the leaves become poisonous. Then the berries are very poisonous. And
can I interrupt you, Glenn? Can we remove Craig's slide from the screen, please, yes. Sam?
Great. And I have to tell little old me, I'm sorry I'm not sleeping, but I had eye surgery 2 weeks ago, so I do need to close my eyes periodically. And I'm supposed to keep adjusting, looking at different distances and not just looking at this screen. So I am awake. But I was going to tell you, I really like the question about, could God have made us to where we didn't need to eat? And I certainly agree that he could. God can do anything. But we're organic beings on this physical body, on this planet Earth. And so we have to consume. And I'm glad God allowed us to be able to eat meat, because I enjoy meat. And I'm from Louisiana, and I'm considered a Cajun. My mother's side of the family is Cajun. Cajuns are known in America for what they eat. We're kidded about we eat everything. And one of the things that I brought to my son last week, I went to see him, and I brought him some from this beast here. I brought him alligator meat for him to cook up. I get this from my brother-in-law who lives in the swamps in Louisiana. He's in the room next door if we really want to talk to the expert. But even you can see on this one right here, there's a bullet hole. That's where he got shot in the head. And alligator meat is very good to eat. I would rather eat the alligator than have the alligator eat me. One of the things that's a common part of their diet now in South Louisiana is a nutri-rat. Nutri-rat is just a giant rat that lives in the water. And let me tell you, nutri-rat, from what I understand, is good to eat, because my wife has eaten some. I think they got it from her brother, who's in the next room, and their dad cooked it up and didn't tell them what they were cooking. But I've helped him skin them. That's very good looking meat. But I will just tell you, my favorite of all the meats that are out there is squirrel. Oh, man, I love squirrel. Good eating meat. So I'm appreciative to God that he allowed us to eat meat. There's a whole range of creatures out there that are really tasty that most people wouldn't think of eating. But, it was allowed. It's good, and it's good for us because it's very lean. So alligators are very good meat. It's got like a pinkish meat with a lot of white marble in it. And it's very tasty if you know how to cook it. So I'm very appreciative of that. I know there's some that believe that, eating and enjoying food is a sin. I had a good friend that said, it's a fact that I have to eat to live, but I don't have to enjoy it. Bible doesn't put those restrictions on us. And I think it's great that he gave us a body that we have to eat. Then he allowed us to have foods that are enjoyable to eat.
Glenn, can I ask you a question? Now, yes. you've said you're a Cajun, and you showed us a crocodile skull, and I've got to admit that Cajuns certainly pick their bones clean if you guys ate that there. But you use that word Cajun quite a bit, and I do know, having been to the States, that the sort of Cajun food tends to imply a bit of spice and a bit of flavor. Can you tell us, where does the word Cajun come from?
It's Acadiana, and it's from the French that came down from Canada and settled in Louisiana. So it's a Cajun. A lot of them speak French. They'll speak their own version of French. And they do eat a lot of spicy food, but we don't consider spicy to mean just hot. It can tend to be hot, but it's just seasoned, a lot of seasoning. And so my other favorite thing to eat is is crawfish. And some people know them as crawdads, but when I took biology at LSU, the biology teacher says, he grew up thinking that they were crawdads, but since 90% of the world's production comes from Louisiana, if they say it's crawfish, then it's crawfish. So the rest of you out there in the rest of the world, it's not crawdads, it's crawfish, and they are very good to eat.
Well, I hate to tell you this, but in Australia, where I live, we eat them too, but we call them lobbies.
Lobbies.
Sorry about that.
They're like little lobsters, but
Yeah.
they're living in the fresh water.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Questions from you, Sam? Any that have come in? And thank yous for a final.
We can indeed, and we can go directly to the question of Doki Doki coming in with specialized diets on the Ark for certain animals, or they don't survive the ride. I'm guessing he's talking about.
Any comment, Diane?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that the animals were described as being clean and unclean. By the time of Noah's flood, some animals would have become scavengers and possibly carnivores because the world was corrupt. But God would have chosen the animals to go on the ark that would survive the journey. And Noah was told to bring on board the ark food for both people and animals. And the law of eating vegetarian food still applied in the pre-flood world. It wasn't changed until after that. So Noah would have provided plant food for the animals. And as John has pointed out with the examples with his dogs, animals that we think of as obligate carnivores, in other words, they have to eat meat and meat only, actually do like and get nutrients from vegetables. So Noah would have taken plant foods for the animals and they would have survived.
One thing that occurs to me comes from an old study that Henry Morrison, his group at ICR, did many years ago on creatures being able to hibernate. Now, in the present world, we think of polar bears and brown bears who sort of stuff their mouth. The squirrels stuff their tummy with all sorts of food, and then they'll survive through the cold winter on the food they've got stored. But the ICR study was not just a statement of guess. There was an observation of that many creatures, far more than are normally thought of, can actually hibernate. Now, given the circumstance of Noah's Ark, it was God who sent the animals. Noah and his sons did not go to collect them. Since it was God who motivated the animals and said, there you go, boys, boat, 2 of you, 7 of you, go find that, I'm sure he would have fed them up to the gills before they went on board the ark, because otherwise, if you have a floating zoo size of the Queen Mary or Queen Elizabeth, then if you've got, 6 people only to feed them every day, I think that the people would have died and the animals would have eaten each other. So I suspect God's preparation of getting animals fit for the ark included both the ability to hibernate as well as store food. Now, I know this creature wouldn't have got on the ark, but we know from experience in Australia, because several of my contacts run crocodile farms, and one that I know specifically shared with me that when they caught a big crocodile, because out here if the crocodile becomes a menace, it's sort of caught, put on a crocodile farm, or caught and killed, or caught and put in a zoo, something like that. He said one of his big crocodiles, it sulked. He said it actually went without food for 18 months because crocodiles actually use their storage capacity in their tail. You and I see it as being used for beating other creatures up, but the crocodile's primary source of food storage is in its tail. And he made the comment that the baby crocodiles are born with enough food for months already stored in their tail out of the eggs that they were hatched from. I don't know what the alligators are like, Glenn, but in Australia, if God had to put crocodiles on the ark, they wouldn't have had any trouble at all surviving the 1 year and 10 days, nor would they need to have been fed.
Yes, a lot of reptiles can do that. And they can also go into sort of torpid, low energy states as well. In fact, I think just about every reptile and every mammal can undergo that sort of low energy state of hibernation or estivation.
Yeah, well, as I understand it, in the Second World War, the lions at London Zoo were fed hay, so that was a period that was longer than 1 year. So
yeah,
who
they
knows
still
how
have
they
still
might have had a
feed
little bit of meat now and then, but there was a shortage of meat, so they had to feed them.
They still
hay.
feed in one of the big zoos in London. They still make sure the lions and tigers get their hay every week because it's got the double function. It's food value, pretty uncertain if it's just hay, but it certainly cleans out their guts. And my dogs do; they go around eating all the plants, etc. So you see relic evidence of that sort. Any other questions, Sam?
We do indeed. We've got this one here, which is an interesting sort of Bible-based one. Doki Doki asked, will the lion really eat straw like Isaiah says?
I think you just answered that, Craig.
Yes.
They certainly can. They certainly are fed that in some of the London zoos. The dogs and cats all eat grass. But the interesting thing is they eat the grass because they can't digest it. So when people say they couldn't be vegetarian because they can't digest grass, well, they wouldn't be grass eaters, but they can digest fruit and all the other things. In fact, Diane, would you like to comment on the digestive enzymes you'd find in dogs and lions and what that could cope with?
Yes, there are studies of digestive enzymes in so-called obligate carnivores, and they do have the enzymes that are needed to break down some plant foods and extract the sugars and the carbohydrates from them. And domestic dogs actually have more copies of these genes than wild dogs like wolves. But it's probably that the wolves have lost them rather than the dogs gained them. The domestic dogs gained them. So it's another example of things going downhill as animals have gone feral.
It's why you'll read in dog books saying don't feed your dog rice, but you discover when you can, he can actually consume it and he quite likes it. Don't overfeed him with that because you'll stuff his stomach up. But in reality, they can digest the starches far better than most so-called experts think they can.
And John, I've often thought, and you like your opinion on this, is that, the whole world had gone corrupt. They were supposed to be vegetarians, but they were already attacking and eating each other. Animals were. Yet God found Noah and chose Noah because Noah was righteous. And you mentioned earlier that God chose the animals also to go on the ark. And so I've often felt that he chose the animals that were still obedient to his word. And so there would have been vegetarian animals on the ark.
Okay.
That's just a take. The Bible doesn't say, one way or the other, but I've always wondered about that.
Okay, good question. The one limitation we could put on your question is the Bible doesn't say the animals ate each other before the flood. It says all flesh had become violent. Now, what that means, of course, at the very least, is they killed each other. Now, there's no evidence that the animals had yet killed man. And the first evidence of animals killing each other and animals killing people comes in the story of Joseph, right, where he's taken away as a slave, and the brothers make up the excuse that they've got a blood-covered coat, and Dad made it. They take it back. Here's the evidence: a wild animal killed him. So by Joseph's day, we know the wild animals were killing people, and the fact is, after the flood, the animals also would have degenerated as we have. But as to whether God put the limitation that you put on, I wouldn't be surprised, because otherwise having 2,000 carnivores that were aggressively looking for a tasty foot or hand to eat would be a rather difficult situation. Yeah. So I suspect there is some validity there. But because we are running out of time at 7:30 now, let me finish off with this point that Sam brought up, and it's really worth pursuing. When you look at the overall picture, the reason for rules is not just because God says, I'm not going to let them eat meat. I'm not going to let them eat cabbages or whatever. He's got a purpose in all of this. And the purpose of the rule about blood is to remind us that the life is in the blood. Statement first occurs in Genesis, repeated over and over again, right through the Old Testament and into the New. And the life is in the blood. If you sin, you will surely die. If you die, your body is dead. You need new life, and therefore you need new blood. And you can only get it through the blood that was shed on the cross when Jesus died, so that his death would count for yours, so that he would take all of your sin upon himself. And for those of you who don't know Christ, then have a look at that. And the whole big picture is not just interesting isolated events of animals surviving. It's not just interesting pictures of lions one day laying down and not eating the sheep and they're all eating grass. It's got to do with the fact that Jesus Christ is the creator. Jesus Christ is the Redeemer who shed his blood, and the life is in the blood, and you can only get new life by taking Christ as your own personal Lord and Savior. And that's a good place to finish, Sam. Any more thank yous before we close today?
No.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Good idea, Sam. Tell them to increase their giving next week. Okay. All right. Well,
all right.
Close off, Sam.
Yeah, all right then. Well, thank you very much for tuning in. Yeah, it's good to have you all here. Good to be back and things like that. If you did enjoy the live stream, please do make sure to subscribe. That really does help us out. And also make sure to like the video and also share it out. All those things are completely free. You don't have to pay a penny to do so. And it really does help us out, helps keep this going, helps feed in more people and things like that into what we're doing and sharing out the good news. But yeah, God bless everyone. Take care, and we'll see you in the next one. See you later. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.